Thank you. The Trump administration designated North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism Monday. Mr. Trump made the announcement during his first cabinet meeting since returning from his 12-day trip to Asia. Margaret Brennan is at the White House.
President Trump said putting North Korea back on the terror blacklists allow the U.S. to put more sanctions on what is already the world's most sanctioned regime. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson acknowledged that the move is largely symbolic, but it does allow the U.S. to stop more entities from doing business with Pyongyang. This puts North Korea on the same list as Sudan, but also Syria and Iran, two countries who have support actively for terrorist groups. Now, these designations do not have a direct link to North Korea's nuclear program, but the administration did acknowledge today that North Korea has not carried out any kind of ballistic missile test in more than 60 days. And that is one reason why the Secretary of State said that President Trump's recent offer, which he made during that trip to Asia, still stands. He is still willing to negotiate. Elaine?
Well, Margaret, do we know why the White House made this announcement now instead of while the president was overseas?
Right. This is overdue in terms of not only that Asia trip, but also the deadline that Congress set, which was November 1st or 2nd for the president to make a decision, and he delayed it. This is a designation that typically the Secretary of State would carry out. And one reason it was delayed is because there was internal disagreement about whether or not they could fairly and legally meet the standard of designating North Korea a sponsor of terrorism. And if you look at what the Secretary of State and the president said today, neither of them provided any evidence of support for terrorist groups or terrorist actions. What they did point to was misbehavior and abuse by the regime in North Korea, not only with that death of Otto Warmbier, the college student who was abused in a North Korean labor camp, but then that assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother, who was killed via a nerve agent at an airport in Malaysia. And it was that assassination that the administration is really leaning hard on to say that this qualifies as terrorism. But the State Department, there are many people who said that it's just not enough to put it back on because North Korea, while it's a very bad actor, it's not the same as what Iran is doing overseas in terms of active support for terrorist groups carrying out terrorist attacks. So there's some argument over whether this actually weakens an important foreign policy tool or whether this is just one other way for President Trump to try to isolate North Korea.
Well, Margaret, we don't usually hear from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on camera. How significant is it that he came out to explain the administration's designation?
Well, we don't see Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on camera very often at the White House or at the State Department, the very agency that he runs. He's very press shy, doesn't like speaking to the press, but he's actually quite good at fielding questions, which you saw him do today in terms of trying to explain how this fits in with the broader strategy. And so it is interesting that the administration put him forward right now, given that he continues to be heavily criticized and under fire, and questions are being raised about just how much longer he will remain in control at Foggy Bottom. Already, it is a D.C. party game to figure out who is going to replace him as America's top diplomat. So today, putting him out there at the White House with the seal behind him at the podium is another way for the Trump administration to say he's still our guy, at least for today. So that was also a boost of confidence or some support, at least, from the White House for the Secretary of State, who was already here for a cabinet meeting and for another meeting on Syria with UN Ambassador Nikki Haley and President Trump.
All right, Margaret Brennan at the White House for us. Margaret, thank you.